Hey everyone, it's Justine from the Red Nation and Red Media. We wish everyone listening happy holidays and a happy new year. This year, the Red Nation has done a whole lot of things. We began January with our annual No Dead Natives mutual aid campaign and joined the National Rise Up for Peltier campaign that took us into February. In February, Miss Sidewinders 22, KDK Bouvier, hosted a charity drag show for us called Stronger Together. In March, we regrouped with Albuquerque's anti-war coalition to host the panel No War, No Imperialism, Russia, NATO, and Ukraine. Comrades hosted the Greater Chaco Relay Run, where runners ran over 100 miles through the Navajo Nation and Greater Chaco for prayer for land and water. In April, Kylie and I traveled to New York City to present on the Red Deal for the Cooper Union Native American Association. We co-hosted book events for the release of An Enemy Such as This by David Correa, and at the end of the month we gathered for our General Assembly where we updated our point program to our 6-point program. On May 1st, Comrade Cheyenne attended the International Workers' Day / May Day parade in Havana, Cuba on her delegation to Cuba. The work between May and June centered on the New Mexico wildfires, the threats in the U.S. Supreme Court against access to abortion, and the Shut Down Red Hill campaign in Oahu. In July, we were collaborating with the Oahu Water Protectors on an anti-imperialism panel on the 4th of July, and later that month, eight of us were invited to the island of Oahu to assist Oahu Water Protectors with the Shut Down Red Hill campaign. Look forward to our debrief this upcoming January. July is also when Kyan and I filmed the documentary Native Nation Voices of Survival with Al Jazeera Blackleaf Films, where they followed us and as we collected our podcast tour content. We spent the first week of August in Oahu connecting with Kanaka Male and other organizers in Oahu, and we ended the month in Minneapolis at the beginning of the Leonard Peltier's Walk to Justice with American Indian Movement. In September, we assisted Honor Our Pueblo Existence and Tewa Women United's initiative to oppose the Los Alamos National Lab's plan to expand and increase plutonium pit production, and we kicked off the media work around Leonard Peltier into high gear. In October, we hosted our annual Indigenous Peoples Day March and Rally in Tewa territory. We hosted a panel called The Triangle of Life with Daniel Flores, Patuch Gilbert, and Marius Chino, a conversation that leads us into the Indigenous Congress for Decolonization this upcoming January. In November, we went on a delegation to Washington, D.C. to assist the end of the Leonard Peltier's Walk to Justice, where we walked the final mile and rallied with American Indian Movement organizers for clemency for Leonard Peltier. We stayed on the East Coast, and a few of us went to the National Day of Mourning and spoke on what is known as Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Right now in December, we just hosted a Language as Sovereignty panel, and we're closing the year with the release of the Red Nation Podcast Tour 2022. Right now, you can watch episode 1 and 2 and bonus episodes on the Red Media Patreon. On the Red Media side, we have released a whole bunch of content on the Red Nation podcast. We began a new podcast series called Red Surgents. We hosted book events. We assisted with the Red Nation podcast tour. We made a contribution to Indian Collective's Land Back magazine. And we grew our team with new board members and new hires. I'll be sure to make a formal announcement this upcoming January. And by the way, our affiliate organization, Oak Lake Writers Society, updated their name to the Oceti-Shawkoan Writers Society. And finally, January 2nd, 2023 will be the deadline to apply for our 2023 Native Liberation School, where we will be teaching a curriculum of the traditions of Indigenous liberation in Turtle Island, Indigenous internationalism, decolonization, queer feminist politics, abolition, and socialist politics. Please apply. Find it in our link trees for Red Nation and Red Media. And finally, I just want to, if you love the work that we've done this year, if you've been watching us throughout this year and want to support us, there are a couple ways that you can support the Red Nation and Red Media. On the Red Nation side, you can make a one-time donation to the Red Media PayPal. The specific link to do this is in our bio. And on the Red Media side, if you want to support us, you can also make a one-time donation, but you can also sustain our media work through the Red Media Patreon. It's actually Red Media who produces the majority of the media for the Red Nation, because we have to hire people, pay people to take the time to produce our content. And that's people like myself, Kyan, Sina, Kylie, and others. We hope you can support both sides of our work this upcoming year. And in return, you'll get access to bonus episodes of the Red Nation podcast and also bonus content from the Red Nation podcast tour 2022. Other than that, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for being with us this year. Thank you so much for your solidarity. We'll see you in 23.
This is Nick Estes and Jen Marley, and we are doing the section for the Red Nation podcast of the best of 2022. And so Jen and I have each picked out some podcast episodes that we felt were really compelling for this year. And we'll discuss those, what we think we did, or what was compelling about those episodes, but also some of the episodes that we want to work on in the future. So I'll turn it over to you if you want to discuss some of the episodes that you found, or an episode or some episodes that you found compelling this year.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's a lot, but I think my I'll save the top favorite one for last. So here's some that come to mind. I really liked the one we did on the Colombian elections this summer. I thought that was a really important one because we talked about it within the greater context of, South America and what was happening, like in general, the quote unquote red tide and leftist leaders coming to power. And there's been a lot that's happened since, but I think that was like a really optimistic one. And I think that was an important one because there was just such like bullshit coverage of that election on most mainstream networks here, as there usually is, right? And I just thought that was a really good in-depth conversation to give like our listeners a look into what's happening there. I think another one that I think was really important was the boarding school episode, the recap on the Federal Boarding School Investigative Report. That was a tough one, but it was an important one because I think whether or not people had a chance to read it themselves or maybe they needed like some things contextualized, I think it helped provide some good additional insight. We offered some critiques. We kind of looked at like the gaps in it, and I thought that was a good one. And a lot of people told me they liked it. And then I guess coming in at number 2 is the Native Horror with Callie Simmons, because I love that one because horror is something that like is kind of it's always a conversation like amongst natives, and it's also simultaneously pretty taboo, like especially for Pueblos. And I thought that was just a cool way to kind of politicize it, right? Looking at it beyond, like outside of the scope of just entertainment or, lore, but like looking at what the tropes in horror mean, and maybe even looking at the way they've taken on a new life in pop culture. But then also looking at like exploring the anti-Indianism in horror, which is overlooked so much. And I just think Callie was super cool. I really loved what she had to offer and her critiques and her work. So that was a cool one. And the number 1 is definitely the Ask Me Anything podcast. That was just super fun to do. I really like engaging with the audience and like getting to know who our patrons are. And I enjoyed answering the questions. I thought it felt more personal and just free flowing. And I'm looking forward to doing another one.
Yeah, the elections episodes that we did 2 this year actually that were really pretty, I thought, compelling, and I learned a lot from the people we interviewed. And that's actually I think the coolest thing about the podcast is that you learn so much. I mean, you have to do preparation and like read a little bit, but Yeah, and you kind of follow people through their various, like how they evolve over time. Like, so some of the people that we've interviewed in the past, like I think like Ollie Vargas, and um, Camilla from Kasachin News, they both have done some really excellent reporting in Latin America. They actually have a podcast that I recommend subscribing to called the Latin American Review. It's now on Apple. They also have a Patreon that I subscribe to as well. That's also really great. But we have, and we covered the Colombian presidential elections, and then we also covered the Brazilian elections as well, and that was really fascinating to see kind of what was like playing out in terms of the rise and fall of Bolsonaro, as well as Lula and the left political project there, and then of course the boarding school, the federal Indian boarding school investigation that was conducted by the Department of Interior was also a good one. I think that one we'll probably do a follow-up episode. I mean, we've done so many episodes on boarding schools, which is kind of interesting. It wasn't like our first foray into them. So if people want to go back, we did one with Denise Lajamadir. We did one with Marionette Pember. And also some of the stuff around child removal. We've done things with like Rebecca Nagel. There's another, challenge to the Indian Child Welfare Act that's coming up, which, that's something, that's been, ongoing and expected to, be essentially overturned in the Supreme Court by, the right wing kind of majority in the court right now. So it's interesting to see, like, one thing that I was like, I guess this is why we're doing these like retrospectives. Sometimes I don't like them at the end of the year. I just don't like lists a lot of times, but sometimes it's good for people to hear like what our favorites are. So, and then lastly, the episodes that we did on Native horror, those were really fun. And Kaylee and I actually sat down for like almost 3 hours doing an entire rundown of the new Halloween franchise. That was actually really fun too. And she recommended watching Crimes of the Future, which I did watch. I have some thoughts on, but maybe we'll do some review episodes of those. Those are always fun too. And yeah, were you gonna say something?
I wanted to see Crimes of the Future. A lot of people have mentioned it ever since that episode came out, and they're like, "Oh, you gotta see it," like David Cronenberg, whatever. But so we should do a review of that.
Watched it.
Yeah, what did you think?
I don't like, I like movies that you can passively watch and not like have to think about a lot, unless they're horror movies. And I have something else to say about horror movies, but this movie, Crimes of the Future, I just felt like it was, it's like this kind of like European, like Western, like BDSM stuff that like makes it into films all the time. I actually don't really understand the ending. I wasn't paying attention by the end of the movie. I thought it was a little too long. And also just thought it was a little bit strained towards the end. But I thought it was kind of fascinating that the fact that like people were trying to like imbibe plastic, or at least modify their bodies to eat industrial waste. But also the kind of like edginess of like body mutilations and things like that. It's weird because like in other cultures, like that stuff is like considered like taboo by the West and like really moralized against. But then like the decadence of the West is like, oh, we're gonna like do self-mutilation as like some kind of like edgy whatever. I don't know what your thoughts on it were. I was just like, why is this a thing?
That's interesting. There's a lot to be said about that. I don't really know because I haven't seen it, but I know people were like mentioning like a underlying ecological message, or because she was saying it's about like humans evolving to like consume plastics and and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah, I know. I mean, it's probably ridiculous too because it's a David Cronenberg film. Like, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's like they're kind of entering into relations to like waste, and it's just funny to me because it's like you do realize that like the United States like takes like 40% of its trash and sends it to like Africa, and so like people do actually like literally live in the waste and the garbage of the pollution of like the first world.
Hmm.
But it's like it becomes like this kind of edgy art performance in this movie. I'll have to rewatch it because I was kind of like I was trying to figure out like it was okay. It was not something that I would like sit down and be like, oh, this is cool. Like, I'm having fun, but I wasn't having fun watching it. But on horror, we had a Oak Lake Writers Retreat recently, back in Lower Brule where I'm from. And we actually changed the name of the Oak Lake Writers Society. We're no longer the Oak Lake Writers Society. We are the Ocheti Shakoi Writers Society. That's a whole story.
Nice.
We came from a place called Oak Lake, which is a field station next to a land grant parcel taken from Dakota people, which is kind of ironic because we were paying rent there to South Dakota State University to meet on our own land. That's a whole other
Jeez.
issue, but since we're no longer affiliated with the location because we're no longer affiliated with SDSU, the university, we changed our name to Ocheti Shakoi Writers Society, and we are now we're putting together an anthology on Ocheti Shakoi ghost stories, and it's not really like ghost stories because ghosts, like even in the popular imagination and like Western culture, ghosts are like often seen as like either things that don't exist or are like supernatural and they're always bad, but or they're metaphors. Like this is a popular convention in U.S. academia and Western academia is like ghost and haunting as metaphors, and it's like, but there are like spirits that actually haunt places, like
Right.
according to like how we view things, and so it's an interesting thing, like ghost stories, like modern ghost stories. Like I think having had Kaylee on the show and engaged in the genre of native horror, we have I have thought really deeply about this in ways that I wouldn't have before. And when we were talking, actually, one of the elders, Laniko Lee, was telling stories about how living near like white settlers and like having lived in their houses, like the hauntings that exist, not necessarily from spirits, but the histories, like the violent histories, and not always directed towards Native people, but oftentimes, white families, especially like patriarchs within the families, being very violent and possessive of like living family members, like women, like children, the house itself, and that's always in ghost stories as well, like even like supernatural, paranormal, like Travel Channel shows where it's always like white guys who are like who want to extend their property relations and sense of ownership to the realm of the spirit world. So there's that aspect, and there's also the aspect that like if within our cosmologies there is a relationship that we have with what would be considered quote unquote monsters, like Sasquatch or Bigfoot, or other beings that exist, some of which are otherworldly, beyond the having never stepped foot in this plane of existence, or so there's a whole like pantheon within like the kind of Lakota like worldview about different spirits and beings that exist and how we interact with them. So yeah, it's not a metaphor for us.
Yep. Next article title: Ghosts are not a metaphor.
Yeah, haunting is not a metaphor. Yeah.
Straight up. No, yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the way it's used in academia. Because, and I think even a lot of the times the way it's used in the context of academia, like it could actually, like we could actually talk about it in terms of like literal hauntings, right? Because I always talk about spaces and, they're haunted by the presence of this and that, event that happened. And it's like, well, that's like literal though, like, like sites of violence, sites of like occupation and colonialism, which is usually what they're describing. And I even think about like a place like the National Archives, like where we were this summer, right? And like the things that are held, or even like the archives, like here at UNM, and the things that are held there, and like the life they take on, it's really eerie and really disturbing. So I've kind of been thinking about that too. And with like, monsters, I think it's funny that, beings that many times in our context serve as like protectors or, aren't necessarily like evil or destructive are always perceived as such, like in the settler imagination, because like, I don't know, it just shows that anything that serves to protect the land or, indigenous people is always inherently going to be a threat. And of course, that's a monster to them, right? And so, I don't know, I've been thinking too about like what is settler fear, or like with the Cronenberg movie, what is settler indulgence, right? It's like what is sacrifice to us is like indulgent to them, like, or what is protection to us is a threat to them. Like, I don't know, it's interesting thinking about the horror tropes more broadly.
Yeah, they also, like, I think it's like they can't feel pain or something either, and so they have to find out new ways of pleasure, and it's like they like do really messed up things. You'll have to watch it. It's really, like they like cut new pieces off of themselves and like get off doing it. It's really weird, but yeah,
That's common in like edgy movies or horror movies. Like a few different films come to mind where that's something that's happening. And I think that just to be honest, like I think all that shit just goes back to everyone's favorite cohort of French philosopher pedophiles who like make the assertion that like human sexuality is on a inevitable trajectory towards like, violence, or that violence is an inherent part of sexuality, and it's bullshit. It's gross. I don't even know how to justify that kind of logic.
yeah, no, there's this like I don't know, and I also think about like native horror and like what its function, like ghost stories, and like what these kind of like the function in native society versus like the function of horror in like settler society. Like one thing that I think is really interesting is that when you tell ghost stories in native context, oftentimes it's at nighttime, and it's very present. It like brings you to the present, and like that's kind of the weird pleasure of horror, is that it brings you into the present. Like whereas like other kind of genres of storytelling tend to be kind of like reflective or like based in the past. There's even future oriented like genres, but horror is always about the present, and it's about like atmosphere and like where you're at, place for native people. Whereas like Western horror is always confronting, it's always trying to exceptionalize an experience. Or it's not always, but most of the times it's trying to exceptionalize an experience from like the colonizer's perspective, that basically they've already done, like a violence that they've already done to like colonize people, but it's them like coming to terms with it. And I think Jamie Lee Curtis, as the final girl in Halloween is a perfect example. It's like her whole like life is defined by the violence of this monster, this unstoppable monster called Michael Myers, who, haunts her endlessly, and she becomes an alcoholic. She becomes estranged from her family. It's like, yeah, that's just literally settler colonialism as it was introduced to like native people. There's intergenerational trauma in her, in her narrative and how she's coping. And so it's just fascinating because like when the white woman is like experiences that, and there's a lot of kind of like anti domestic violence and anti-violence tropes within the Halloween franchise and the later iterations, but also there's like kind of this deep-seated kind of colonialism and settler colonialism. Like even the note, like there's kind of mention, there's like the kid dressed up like a native person for Halloween. There's like the mention of use of peyote as like kind of like a joke, because like spiritual practices to native to white people is just like either a recreation for them that they can just participate in, or it's like some kind of like spiritual healing. They turn our traditions and our medicines into like things to solve problems for their society that they created, and then they just market it. I mean, that's how you got like coca, turned into cocaine. That's how you get like ayahuasca turned into like white bro, like hippie, whatever, who are feeling alienated, and that's why you get like hippies like taking peyote as well. Anyways, I went way off topic on that. on that.
I mean,
I
you
could
could
talk
go
about
hard.
horror. Yeah, I could just do like a native horror podcast.
Right. A whole new show, a whole new, yeah, series.
So I guess my favorite episode, and some of yours actually overlap with mine, but my favorite ones were, I think, the Peltier episodes that we did, having been involved in like the Leonard Peltier work for almost going on a decade now. I think I started doing it back in 2013. Or really getting involved. I knew about the case longer than that, but really getting involved and like really kind of doing an in-depth, search or research on that, and going to the Jumping Bull property, and actually visiting the Oglala community where it happened, and talking to the survivors of the shootout of that day is also it was really powerful and impactful, and actually the living memory of the violence and the reign of terror, exists within that community, a community that is very humble, and really kept alive this movement for Leonard Peltier's freedom, as well as the larger issues that were raised during that time, during the 70s, because it was also within these communities, these kind of Western communities in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where you saw the treaty issue really taking taking the forefront of the Red Power movement, and what was happening with the American Indian movement at the time, as well as Wounded Knee. But it's also, if you go there now, it's fascinating because the FBI, was so heavily invested in that specific region, that it really makes you question, like, what were they actually doing there? Like this whole idea that the FBI's role is an investigative role in Indian country, right? Because there's all these questions that were kind of like raised for me as somebody who studies American Indian history, law and policy, as well as like just like the amount of resources that they invested into policing a specific social movement that was originating from this very, very poor community. And then to keep that kind of animosity alive over, 4 or 5 decades against these people is just like incredible. It's an incredible story because, the investigative role that the FBI played in Indian country was to investigate major crimes, because the federal government has jurisdiction. The state can't send in state troopers. They can't send in the National Guard. They're restricted. So policing this social movement and the so-called like civil disturbances that were happening on Indian reservations was the sole kind of jurisdiction of federal policing agencies, kind of under the umbrella of the Department of Justice. But as like that kind of thing unfolded and that issue unfolded in Pine Ridge, sure, it was the Bureau of Indian Affairs Police that were participating in it, but the FBI was kind of like the organization that was most aggressive, most at the forefront, but also the one that was functioning less as a detective force solving major crimes as it was being political police. Because if you have 30 agents who are supposed to be there investigating major crimes such as homicides, rapes, larceny, all those things, arson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all that stuff was happening. Kidnappings, beatings were happening on the reservation, but they weren't being investigated. So you had this massive crime, wave that hit Pine Ridge. You had 30 dedicated FBI agents to that one reservation, which isn't very large. It's not like, a single city in the United States probably doesn't have 30 FBI agents, special agents on duty to police them. So what were they doing there when you have dozens and dozens of unsolved murders, even more beatings, even more kind of reported like, violences that are happening against, some people were AIM members, some people were AIM supporters. It didn't matter. But none of those things were getting solved or investigated. And then you have this instance in which, two FBI agents were killed in this shootout. And then the the co-defendants with Peltier were actually let off by reason of self-defense, given the situation that was created, the kind of hostile atmosphere that the FBI contributed to, that like raised suspicion, against members of the American Indian movement and their supporters, to the point where, they were doing, night raids where they were like busting into people's homes, things like that. And so it raises the question of like, if those two individuals were found, not guilty of shooting these two FBI agents, and their co-defendant Peltier was later arraigned and, charged and convicted of murder, and then later found to be aiding and abetting that murder, not necessarily committing the murder because they couldn't prove that he actually shot those agents, then who is he aiding and abetting? Because the two quote unquote murderers were found not guilty. So it's just an interesting, and there's other kind of avenues that I think we'll explore later on in the podcast of this whole issue. Like the issues of like Joe Stuntz, like his murder, his killing was never investigated. Nobody actually knows who shot him. I mean, we know it was law enforcement bullets. There's all these other killings that have happened. I mean, the other one is like Anna Mae Aquash. She kind of really is at the forefront in a lot of local people's memory because she was such a beloved kind of figure of that community. Her killing, was really, really kind of devastating to that community. I think it's been used and construed within a larger FBI narrative that's against AIM, which is a whole other story, a whole other podcast that we could do on that. But that was my favorite one. And then just kind of seeing the culmination of going from the Jumping Bull shootout this summer and being there to the Washington, D.C. march was just really, really powerful to see and to meet kind of all the people that we've worked with along the way and the stories that we've been following. We could actually make an entire documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. TRN doc coming soon. Just kidding, but hopefully, like, for real. Yeah, it's important because, I mean, especially for like a new generation who maybe have heard the name Leonard Peltier, but like really don't know any details. And then, or even just people who have been following the case, but still don't know these details, who don't know the legal breakdown. And of course, since then, some of the people who helped imprison him have now spoken in favor of his clemency, right? Just simply on the basis that legally it doesn't hold up, right?
Yeah, no, I think like James Reynolds was one of his the appeals prosecutor. I think he worked with the prosecutor's office then. And it was just like, this is, a time period when this could have gone through was, that time period in AIM. And I think it's still like my whole thing though. Yeah. And I agree with a lot of that. Like, it's great. These people are coming forward, but I'm also just like, but nothing has really changed. The FBI used an informant to give a gun to a water protector in Standing Rock, which is entrapment. And, she ended up serving several years in prison for that. And, they're still like surveilling, indigenous movements. It doesn't matter whether or not they're, if they're picking up guns like the American Indian movement did, or they're kind of eschewing armed resistance, like as we are seeing today with the water protector movement. The crackdown is just as brutal and just as intense. And I was just thinking about this when we saw the images of the Keystone pipeline that exploded. I think it was in Washington County in Kansas, spilled like 14,000 gallons or 14,000 barrels of oil, enough to fill like Olympic-sized swimming pool. And, it's the largest leak on that pipeline. And nobody from TC Energy, which was formerly TransCanada Energy, is being charged for destroying property, the very things that water protectors, serve time for. destroying water, destroying the land, and not even committing to a plan or even admitting that they can actually clean up the spill. That says nothing of the knowing kind of like destruction of the planet for these purposes, of profit, and holding hostage, native people and every group of people who doesn't, who's poor and marginalized, doesn't really have a control over this current, society, about the kind of energy that we consume and how we consume that energy. So I think I think the implications are kind of far reaching in this case, and they go beyond just like a single man. And the other aspect, and I'll just shut up after this, but the other aspect of it that I found really fascinating is the church committee and all the revelations that were made by the Senate investigation around the FBI's kind of deliberate violation of civil rights, the CIA's surveillance of domestic protest movements, the Army's, the U.S. military's role in crushing anti-war movements within the United States and civil rights movements within the United States. And they focus on almost every single group, the Panthers, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, all these other groups, except for they stop short of, anything that's like kind of after COINTELPRO in 1972 doesn't really make the cut. But so like this idea that, somehow we can look at the Panthers and we can understand like, yeah, they were directly targeted and infiltrated by the FBI. The FBI waged a war. Well, the difference between the Panthers and the American Indian movement is that like the Panthers never engaged in armed confrontation with the FBI. The American Indian movement did at Wounded Knee, and then also at the Jumping Bull property. But the American Indian movement also didn't dissolve after these kind of like the heyday of the 1970s, and it's like it waned in its influence and support after the Vietnam War kind of like formally was the United States kind of ended its involvement in there, but it still continued on. And I think that's the sore spot here, is to really control the historical narrative of like how we remember the past, how we remember somebody like not just Leonard Peltier, but the movement that he represented and the aspirations of that movement.
Right. Like the twisting of history. And there's still false narratives surrounding Peltier that are unfortunately kind of popular today, right? That, some suspect were fabricated by the feds, right? Like, there's definitely the influence of that exists today in how we talk about Peltier, how we talk about AIM in general, how we talk about the men of AIM, how the women of AIM get erased. And I think like it's scary. It's really scary to see just how long some of these things last and how they can even get popular support with like little to no evidence at all.
Right. And also just how the legitimacy of the very institution that helped crush Dr. King, who helped crush, the Panthers, any kind of, even if it wasn't even ostensibly left, social movement that was working for the change, for the better. And then how they can come out unscathed and have their narratives like front and center as like the narratives of these movements. And it's not to say that AIM is somehow like innocent or something like that. That's not what this is about. This is about how we remember history and like why we remember history and who writes that history and who controls that narrative.
Right. Fighting against revisionist history, which as we've seen, like organizing as Red Nation, like we've seen history get revised right in front of our eyes, like in a matter of months.
Like how you're on a mural, but you weren't even invited to speak.
Yeah, that was wild. Like we had to like crash like the mural unveiling, like yeah, it's pretty scary. Or how like our name and logo gets cropped out of like images on our own banners, or how like our names aren't included in like things that like yeah, it happens fast.
Yeah, but it's also like I think that's, I'm always like I think that there's a lot to say about that, because it's like we put in the work, we do the work as the organization, but the work is about winning. It's not about labeling, putting our name on everything, and we live in a world where, or we live in a society, we live in a culture that privileges and actually encourages and incentivizes you to brand everything. And I think it's important to recognize that we are part of all of these things, for sure. And when the history is written, you know, um, at the end of the day, like, yeah, we will, we can say that we were there and here, and this is what we accomplished, this is what we helped accomplish. But at the end of the day, it's not about that. It's actually about winning gains for our people. And if you're worried about branding, then you're just an entrepreneur.
Right, right.
But yeah, that's why we have this podcast, is to I guess set the record straight I think and this kind of gets to the next part of this, is like, how do we move forward as the podcast? Because we have so many different strands now. We have Red Power Hour. We have we just hired Chiari, a new employee with the Red Nation, or excuse me, with the Red Media. We have an editorial collective. We're doing books. I'm working with Mark Tilson on republishing his book of poetry. As a water protector. We're doing all sorts of things, and it's like, some of it's a little bit daunting. And also, some people, when you tell them, they're like, wow, that's crazy. Like, how do you do all these things? And it's like, well, it's really difficult. It's very time consuming. But I think that's the commitment that we've made, is to, it's as much as a political project as is an intellectual project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to not just, like, this isn't just an academic exercise. It's actually about, how do we mobilize these ideas and popularize them?
Mm-hmm.
And one is, we have to choose our struggle and our terrain of struggle sometimes, which means not kind of falling victim to this like branding issue about like logos or whatever, competition for recognition, but actually like working collaboratively with people on the ground and really uplifting those voices. And yeah, I don't know if you have any like thoughts on that, or like upcoming podcast episodes or stories that you want to highlight.
Well, that's what excites me so much about the new Al Jazeera and Blackleaf collaboration that we did, and helping create an episode that's a part of their documentary series, because we literally just wanted to highlight all the work that was being done around us, right? So we kind of I feel like in that moment we kind of took the emphasis off of what Red Nation is doing and just looked at what is happening regionally. And we collaborated with multiple organizations that have been doing incredible work. And I think that's just like ideally what Red Media would continue to do, right? Is to highlight and bring attention to things that are overlooked, to the important work that's overlooked, and to keeping like the vital context that often is erased when these stories make mainstream media, right? I mean, we've seen the way even local news outlets or national news outlets just totally distort our messaging or what we're doing or what actually happened. And I think Red Media, I hope, is gonna like give us a chance to not only like challenge and correct revisionist history, but to give people a voice that otherwise wouldn't have it, right? And that's like a part of our mission. And I think, I mean, seeing even just a short documentary like that really reminds me how active like this region is. And it even when things seem slow, which I think is like how a lot of organizers are feeling right now, like ongoing pandemic and the way things have changed, but there's always that fire like under the surface still. And I think that's what's really empowering about Red Media too. And I hope we do continue to grow and to like, I'm excited for like full length documentaries, right? For actual news broadcasts someday even. I think people really, really want this. People really, really want content that is not only for and by Native people, but that like offers an alternative like politics, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm excited about Red Media. I'm excited about the diversity of content and literature that I hope we're going to produce or help produce. I'm especially excited for books, like, and children's books. I don't think there's enough, rad indigenous children's literature out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the kind of we talked a lot about this when we founded Red Media, about the kind of newsy aspect of it. And we do have a channel, Telegram channel, the Red Media or the Red Nation Telegram. I think it's just at the Red Nation Telegram, where we kind of cover a lot of that stuff. And I'm always like, I think Twitter and like kind of these traditional social media outlets, at least for me, I don't find them useful as far as like finding information anymore. I'm there basically just to like read what my friends and comrades are saying or try to get perspectives. But it takes a lot of like, these days it takes a lot of filtering to get through all that crap. And I've just been subscribing to like, I still use RSS feeds to get my news and Telegram, because I don't have to like wade through kind of like all the algorithms or like, some controversy. Like what I noticed about Twitter, and I was actually like kind of reflecting on this a little bit, because there's some channels that I follow, and I notice how they actually, a lot of channels that I follow that I like and I don't like, kind of follow controversies that are created on Twitter. And so this is why like they really are upset that like Elon Musk, is like has taken over Twitter, which I think it sucks in a lot of ways. And I think he's just an awful billionaire who, people idolize him for the wrong reasons. But he's getting under their skin because it's the channel in which they create the news, right? A lot of people don't report on the news anymore. They create it. And I think it's a bad way to join it or to do it, because we just see this hype machine of like, and we try to avoid some of this stuff, but we have to weigh in at some point, like the hype machine of like patriotic socialism. Then it was like MAGA communism, or like the hype machine of, I don't know, just all these issues that sometimes are important to weigh in on and a lot of times aren't, because they're just like so artificial. And then when you're in the community and you try to explain that to somebody, they're like, what are you talking about? It seems like a very confined world. Maybe it does involve a lot of people. Maybe it does matter. But I think, our orientation has always been to kind of highlight the things that may not get reported on. And I think of like even other, I guess, like comrade podcasters, and how they approach this. And I think of like Max Alvarez. I've always wanted to have him on the show, but maybe this is open invitation to Max Alvarez, because he does some really amazing labor reporting, and he's always like 2 months ahead of like the mainstream news when they're going to report on it, because he's been reporting on the rail strike for the longest time. And he had such great takes and interviews with railroad workers. And he's just like very grounded in like how his orientation. And he's also like been following the Supreme Court case that, may take away the ability or the right to strike, which is like huge and monumental, and there's some mainstream coverage of it, but not really. And so, but he's not a hype machine, he's just reporting like on these stories. And I always appreciate that, and like, that's the kind of stuff that I've always liked about the Red Nation podcast. My favorite episode of all time is actually still the Monoman episode. That was like our second episode that we produced. And, I went to a ricing camp and learned about wild rice and like the history of that, and like the songs that they would sing, and, the dances and the stories, and like the politics of wild rice and food sovereignty. And, it just doesn't get, sometimes it doesn't get like the kind of listens that other like kind of more clickbaity podcasts get listens to. But that's my hope, is to kind of get that slow news out there again.
Yeah, and that episode was like beautiful. Like I think you described it as an audio essay, or because you got not only interviews and words, you actually got like soundscapes, like songs, and like the sounds of the activities like involved in the rice. Like I don't know, and that stuff is cool and like really underrated for sure.
Yeah, and I think because of the pandemic, we've moved to this format of like Riverside where we sit in different locations and have a, record a podcast, where before a lot of the podcasts that are recording were in person, like I would just walk around with a microphone and interview, and the podcast tour does that, and so that's kind of something I'm hoping to bring back and hoping to build a studio here. I know Ua has his studio in Toronto, trying to build a studio here in Minneapolis. And I know that you guys have, there's a lot of you down in Albuquerque that are, traveling around. And I think that's also just something I really enjoyed. It's one thing to interview somebody over a computer like we're doing now. It's totally different to actually go into the context of somebody's home or to meet them in a place, where like an activity is taking place, where you get to hear and feel all those sounds. The haptic kind of element of doing interviews is much different, in those contexts. And yeah, that's something that I'm hoping to do more of. And I have some ideas about some stuff that I want to, that we're kind of working in the works of kind of fleshing out right now. But that's my hope for 2023. I don't make New Year's resolutions, but
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I mean, kind of giving the podcast that like journalistic flair again, right? Like going to people, interviewing them, and like making those connections too, right? Like you get to connect with people in ways that you can't when it's online. Making relations, which is like always been important to us. I think what I'm excited about moving forward for podcasts is I guess I've been thinking a lot about podcasts as an educational tool, because most of the people that reach out to me or talk to me about the podcast say that that's how they use it. And it's a lot of people who listen to it while they're working, like, while they're at work. It's a lot of, everyday working class people who say that they like to listen to it so they can learn as they're working. And I think that people really appreciate that we're not like the hype-based podcast, that we do present with them like solid facts that they could take away and, use in their lives. And I think that's something that like should never be compromised. Like I really don't give a shit about Twitter drama. And I think a lot of people really don't. Like you said, a lot of people don't even know what's happening. It's in such a vacuum. And I think like sometimes we feel like we're obliged to respond or engage because like with other leftists, or like we're trying to make ourselves visible to the left. But like I don't know if I care about that anymore. Like what what is the left we're trying to make ourselves visible to, like here in the US? Meanwhile, we've made relations with so many comrades and people in the global South, right? And I think that's another thing that makes this unique, is our coverage of politics outside of the United States. And I think that's also something that people appreciate a lot. So I'm looking forward to continuing that. Like I'm looking forward to, keeping all of our content like very internationalist. I'm looking forward to continuing to make sure the podcasts are like a learning tool. And I think that, I don't know, I think podcasts are overwhelmingly like taking the place of, articles, right? People would rather sit and listen to a podcast than read a lengthy article. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, for, I guess, kind of intellectual projects that I'm working on, papers or think pieces, I'm wondering, like, how could these be converted into a podcast? Or how could stuff that I'm thinking about be, incorporated into the podcast to reach a broader audience? Because, and another thing I appreciate too, again, is like the discussion. Like we get to like see how people respond to things. It gives us helps us to better read the moment, to better see where people are at in a way that I think producing other types of content, we don't really get the same kind of feedback or engagement. And even if it's not always positive, right? Like even if it's put out something controversial, like it is cool to kind of just see where people are at, see how people are responding.
Well, I think the people that respond aren't necessarily like fans of the show all the time.
Right.
Like the last one was like the Wakanda. I didn't even listen. I didn't get a chance to. I didn't see Wakanda Forever. B, sadly, I didn't listen to the whole Wakanda episode. I just listened to the clips. And so, and also I read the hate comments, but it's just funny because doing this work, it's like not a lot of people online will be like, this is really great. Thanks for doing this. It's like people will only comment when they hate something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And they're usually only commenting on the clips. Most of them hadn't read or listened to the whole thing. Like the sex trade episode, it was clear that people like read the title and were like, ugh.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, I think podcasts provide several, avenues. Like one is, conversations and speaking is like a much more natural form of like learning and communicating than like writing is. I still think the written word is incredibly important and we shouldn't abandon it, but we should focus on all kind of aspects of how people learn and consume and digest information. And I think this is the best way. Like I listen to podcasts when I drive, or when I'm traveling or when I'm walking to work, taking the bus, or just like getting up in the morning, sometimes it's the first thing I do, drink a coffee and listen to a podcast. But it's a way to communicate, in short amounts of time that doesn't take the kind of effort that reading does. And I think people should still read.
Yes.
reading is like incredibly important. And we do this podcast because we also read a lot. I read so much, and you have to read to really read and study to really be able to present information in ways that's digestible and accessible. And and so the last thing I would say about the podcast is I think the goal of Red Media is to build confidence in people that things can change and to provide stories of struggle. That's a much different orientation than some other podcasts. And, I think as people on the left, we have to admit that we're just fringe. We're fringe. The left is fringe in the United States. That's the truth. We are on the fringe. And you can stay on the fringe. You can, as Lenin said, march to the marshes and go into the swamp to seek cover, or you can try to engage as many people as possible and try to become part of the mainstream, according to our terms, and to try to reach a wide audience. And that's really what we should be trying to do. That's the goal of all of this. It's not to just be on the fringe all the time. And, add to the fact that we're leftists and socialists and that we're indigenous. Now we're really fringe. So that's also a challenge. But I think it's to be all three of those things means it doesn't mean to just constantly critique the world as it exists, which is incredibly important to do and to try to analyze, but also to uplift and understand that we're not just here to critique, we're actually here to show what people are doing, what everyday people are doing. And hopefully that builds confidence in your life. And it doesn't always mean, chaining oneself to a piece of machinery, which is also really cool and honorable. And you should do that if you want to. And we'll cover it. But also if it's just, creating poetry or, telling Native ghost stories or producing art and literature according to like Native people that speaks to Native communities, that's also important. That's also a political act in many ways, but you can't just have art for art's sake either. You have to have a kind of broader political message. And I think we're trying to navigate that and in our orientation towards our audience, as well as our orientation to the stories that we curate and help tell.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just uplifting people should be the priority, right? Especially now. A lot of people are fighting demoralization hard. A lot of people are looking for new ways to think about reality, right? A lot of people are looking for new ways to understand the world. And what capitalism has to offer is nothing, right? Capitalism has only competition to offer as a means of seeking out a better life for yourself. And so I think people are truly like thirsty for new ways of thinking, new sources of inspiration and empowerment. And I hope we provide that like in some way, you know, and I think we do. People, you know, people do reach out and people say, you know, people compliment the podcast or talk about how it's impacted them. And that means everything, right? Even if it's just a few, like knowing that what we can produce does impact people and how they think about the world is, I mean, that's why we play this game.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good place to end it. Yeah, we look forward to 2023. We'll be back. We're also doing an Ask Me Anything later this month in December on the 29th. Hopefully it'll be live. So you can ask your questions, whatever you have for us. We'll just have a live conversation. So
Sheesh, live.
yeah, I don't know about the live streams all the time. It's not that I'm against them. It's just the kind of consistency of doing them is hard. But hopefully we get some more consistent, and we also have just a lot of cool people now doing the podcast. So yeah, it's going to be great.
Heck yeah.
Hi, Red Nation. I'm Jonah from the Urban Theories Podcast. And I'm Aram from Artivist Magazine. And we just wanted to say that we are big fans of your work. And my Palestinian roots make me love every time you guys talk about Palestine. And I appreciate the Samia episode, it's very sweet. And we look forward to all of your content in 2023. Bye.
Hi, I'm going to try this at round two. I would pick the Indigenous Plurinationalism episodes and the God is Red episodes, both for really appreciating the voice and presence of Nuamauta, and also for unpacking so concretely both the need for a place-based temporality in the Goddess Red episode, and for what collaboration looks like that's not confederation politics like the EU or something like that, trying to avoid that kind of problem. And I just don't think we can undo Europeanism and sort of the worst parts of legalism without these concepts. So thanks. Y'all are great. Bye.
Hi, Elena. We're recording.
Hello.
How's your day been?
It's been a long day.
Yeah, you were saying you haven't gotten up from your computer pretty much all day.
Pretty much all day. It's like, the holidays are coming up, and so my company, they gave us the week between Christmas and New Year's off paid. It's like a bonus. That's our bonus for the year. But in order to do that, we have to do all the work before we get done for the year. So it's like been meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's a little bit exhausting. I feel a little brain dead.
And here we are recording, making you do even more.
It's okay. This is fun. This is energizing. This is the exact opposite of work.
Well, my last class was last Monday, and I just kind of took a 3-day break because this fall ended up being way crazier than I expected it to. It really did, for like all kinds of reasons, but exhausting. Yep. Also, I feel like I'm more pale up here in the far north. It's depressing. Every time I look at myself, I'm like, ah! I think it's like the filtered sunlight, or like the sun up here isn't as intense as it is in New Mexico, but I don't know.
Well, it's the altitude. I mean, we're, in Albuquerque, you're a mile high.
That's true.
And up here, we're at almost 7,200. So, yeah, anytime you go out in the sun here, you get color, but not in the far north.
Oh my God. Why didn't I think about this when I took this job? I finally have a halo light. I don't know if you can see the ring. It reflected in my glasses. Ooh, there's a big one.
Yeah.
For those watching the YouTube, you can see it. It makes me look substantially less pale. I actually am. I'm doing it just for the podcast, though. Sometimes I actually just sit under my halo light and act like it's the sun. Isn't that sad?
Yeah. I feel you. It was like cloudy here for 2 days, and I started to think like, what the hell? Where did the sun go? What is going on? Here we get 350 days of sun a year. So when it disappears for 2 days, it's like really scary. I'm looking out the window going, where is? Oh, today's sunny, so it's good.
Lucky. I miss it.
Yeah.
This episode is not about how much sunlight there is in the various places that we live. I just wanted everyone to feel my pain. Thank you for listening to me. We're at the end of 2022, and we're doing so. Jen Marley and Nick Estes are comrades who do the Red Nation podcast main feed episodes. They earlier today recorded their best of 2022 episode. And so Elena and I, because we're co-hosts for Red Power Hour, are doing ours a few hours later. And so this is basically us going back through the catalog of all of the Red Power Hour episodes of 2022 and picking our favorites, and then reflecting on why those are our favorites and maybe some of the benchmarks we've reached in 2022 with the podcast. Would you like to start, Elena? Maybe let's go chronologically.
Okay.
Just in case folks want to go back and listen to the episodes.
So which one chronologically is first?
Okay, so I have my earliest one is No Good Nazis from March 28th. Did you have one earlier?
No, I think that's right.
Okay.
No Good Nazis. That actually, when I think of that podcast, I think it was supposed to have a different title. The only good Nazi is a dead Nazi, or what was it? We were batting around titles for that podcast, and I couldn't remember what you had said because you had a great one. And so when Sina, who's our producer, texted me and asked me what the name was, I was like, damn, I can't remember. And I said No Good Nazis, but it wasn't supposed to be No Good Nazis. It was supposed to be something like Nazi Lives Don't Matter. That's what it was supposed to be.
Wow, I can't believe you remember that. Because I feel like we do that a lot. We bat around different titles. I'm sure people who listen to Red Power Hour will know, like, pretty much every episode when, like, a zinger, someone says a zinger, I'm like, that's the title of the episode. Oh, man. I have to be honest, I don't entirely remember what we talked about in that episode. I do remember we did an entire segment on Leonard Peltier. And because there was a lot happening in January and February of 2022, a lot of advocacy, I think, in Congress, just on Capitol Hill in general, I think, to advocate for his clemency. And 2022 has been an exceptional year in general, I think, for really the largest scale effort to demand Peltier's clemency since we started the Red Nation, I would say. And like lots of different people. Did all those like famous Hollywood Indians do a whole petition or something?
The Hollywood elites. Yeah, there was I have some feels about that. The march, the Peltier March to Washington, D.C., which our comrades participated in, and they ended up, I'm assuming I wasn't there, but on the mall in Washington, D.C., where the White House is at one end, and they were having some sort of very fancy ball at the same time. And it just struck me. I was just a voyeur. I was just watching the news and reading things that our comrades were posting, and that and then I was seeing things that other people that I know are posting. And there's this great, social event in the White House run by Jill Biden for Indigenous Peoples Month. And outside, there's people, our comrades, freezing, outside doing these advocacy and rallying for Peltier. And it just struck me as being sort of odd and weird and kind of sick that people are dressed up and enjoying horse duvers in the White House with Jill Biden while other people are outside advocating for the longest held political prisoner in U.S. history. And just one of those weird Indian country things.
Yeah, it was very striking. That was the week of November 14th through the 19th, I think, was the dates. And that was the same week that the opening arguments or whatever for the ICWA case was being seen in the Supreme Court. And so some of our comrades, but obviously others, were also out in front of the Supreme Court, holding a rally in support of ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. And so that was happening that week in DC. And then also the spiritual walk, right, for Leonard Peltier's freedom was coming to DC in that week. And they were denied a meeting with President Biden. I'm pretty sure President Biden knew they were coming. And so it was like disturbing to see kind of like Native actors, the Native elite, kind of inside the halls of the White House meeting with Jill Biden. And then, someone like Rachel Thunder, who had literally walked from Minnesota Mokoche, which is here, to Washington, D.C., and she was in a spiritual way the entire time. So it's like she left here at the end of August. So she walked for like 3 months, basically, and kind of being denied access to those kinds of meetings. So all I can say is that, in RPH, one of our other favorite episodes, for example, was when we got to talk to two of the writers, Chad Charlie and Tommy Pico, from Reservation Dogs. And we're going to do another Reservation Dogs episode for sure. We're still huge fans, but some of the actors who were there, actually, not just actors, but writers and people from the show who were with Jill Biden that week in that fancy soiree, they were from the show, Reservation Dogs. And we're huge fans. But you guys, if you got the power, you better be using those chances that you get when you're in those spaces and talking to those people. You better be using that for more than glad handing and like wearing pretty jewelry and nice clothing by Native designers. You better be advocating for the things that your relatives who are not allowed inside those spaces are advocating for and making incredible sacrifices, including Leonard Peltier, to advance the struggle of liberation for our people. That's all I got to say.
And many of them signed on to the letter, and they had their pretty pictures posted on social media,
which is great.
It's great. But exactly, I mean, that's like, it is part of your responsibility as being a visible Native person to not just put your picture and signature on something to be shared through social media, but when you're in those spaces to actually say, thank you so much for inviting me to this house built by enslaved Africans on stolen land. But why don't you talk to Joe about, clemency for Peltier? And it was sad. It made me sad to see the juxtaposition of those two.
It bothered us. I'm going to let you all know, if you listen to this podcast, any of you who we've reviewed, actors and stuff, it upset us in the Red Nation to see the very distinct contrast. Yeah. Like, do better. Yeah. It's just the truth.
Have a responsibility. Your visibility gives you a responsibility. Yep. And it's important, particularly now when all of those things came together in ICWA, which is, for a lot of us, it's personal. It's deeply personal.
Of course.
So I don't want glad handing, sharing drinks in the White House, photos being all over social media. I want to see people, talking about why these things are important to, the continuation of Native sovereignty and actually the very existence of Native nations.
And it's also important to understand that, like, if you're allowing yourself to be like glad-handed by power that way and invited into those spaces, you know, in a week where there is like real threats to tribal sovereignty, that, you know, the overturning of ICWA would imply, or there are people who, you know, have been pushing for decades to get, you know, our elder Peltier released from prison, that you doing that instead of maybe being outside with the people who are like picketing the halls of power, it makes it look like somehow Biden or that like the United States is like friendly to Native people. And so it's almost like you're crossing a picket line in a certain way. And so don't do that, you know, be on the right side of history, be on the side of your relatives, because the United States don't give a damn about you. Doesn't give a damn about you, doesn't give a damn about Native people. We have to fight for everything that we have. And so just remember who you are, who you're accountable to, and where you come from. So that's all I have to say, because the imagery of it was really, I don't know. It was bad. It didn't make y'all look that good. I'm just gonna be real honest with you. So yeah. I know we're a bit off topic, but I guess we're just supposed to be reflecting on episodes, and so it's like, hey, like, you know, we started the year talking about Peltier, and many people in the Red Nation, including like Nick, our comrade Nick from the other side of the podcast, has done work for Peltier's clemency for many years. And so we've shared headquarters with the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee in Albuquerque for many years. So this is something that means a lot to us, and it should mean a lot to everyone because, you know, as has been said in the past, and we said this in the episode No Good Nazis from March 28th of this year, that like until Leonard is free, none of us is free. And that's really true. Like, I think the spirit of Indigenous resistance is locked up in that cell with him. So yeah.
And it is just his being incarcerated and denied, you know, basic human rights. He's a symbol of all of us. And, you know, you may be flying around, you know, with wings on your ankles and dressing up, like Melanie said, in pretty native designed clothes and wearing all your best jewelry. But what this country actually thinks of you is locked up in that jail cell. And it's
exactly. And no amount of y'all know what we think about representation by now. If you've been listening to our podcasts this year, ain't no amount of representation or like inclusion into those spaces is going to change settler colonialism in this country. The only thing that's going to change settler colonialism is overturning colonialism, period. Yep. And advocating for Indigenous liberation. So get with the program, because there are a lot of Native people are in that space already, and ready to throw down and have thrown down. So yeah. Yep. One other thing I wanted to say about that episode is, you know, there's also been such an important increase of representation also about MMIWG. I've seen there's like news stories being featured, like docu-series on, was it Peacock, or it's on like on Hulu? It's like an ABC special story called, I think, Murdered and Missing in Montana. I watched it. It came out a few weeks ago. That new show, Alaska Daily, that features Academy Award winner Hilary Swank, she has star power. So they obviously wanted to draw people to the show with her being kind of the showrunner. That's actually quite a good show, I think, in terms of that. The through line for that show is also about MMIWG in Alaska. Mm-hmm. So there's interesting stuff that's transpired in 2022 around MMIWG. However, right, there was still this narrative about somehow you couldn't advocate for MMIWG and for Leonard Peltier's clemency because some people thought that somehow he had perpetrated violence against Anime Akwash. And so in that episode, No Good Nazis, we break it down. We dispel that longstanding FBI-generated lie about Peltier. And from an Indigenous feminist perspective, we're like, yeah, you can totally advocate for Peltier's freedom and clemency and still be ride or die for, ending MMIWG as a Native woman or as an Indigenous feminist. That they're not a contradiction, So that was the other thing I was kind of proud of that we were able to do.
Yep.
Well, the next episode, since we were already on the topic of reservation dogs, right? Because you had this down on your list, Elena, was our episode from April 11th. The title of the show, unfortunately, okay, this is what happened. The title of that show was Queer Indigenous Feminism and Indigenous Movements in Media. Okay, so we were approached by a dope-ass comrade named Nikki from the University of California, San Diego, sometime in the fall, I think, because we did a Reservation Dogs episode last fall, the fall of 2021, October, I think, of 2021, after the first season wrapped. And Nikki listened to it and was like, can we hold an event with you guys and maybe some of the writers from Reservation Dogs in the spring of 2022? And we're like, hell yeah, that sounds great. And so Nikki made it happen. And we had that event in March, the last week of March, or when was that? Yep. It was just like a live stream thing that was hosted, I think, by the School of Communication at UCSD. And the title of that event was Queer Indigenous Feminism and Indigenous Movements in Media. And then some other Red Media folks did a media workshop with undergrads at UCSD. And so instead of creating a different title that would have made more sense for the podcast, we just used the same title of the event that didn't give you any indication about what the content was. So we're sorry about that. That was a total... I did catch it like a month later, and I was like, yo, why is this the title of this podcast episode? I did not make that decision. That was from other comrades and producers in Red Media, which is totally fine. But
we take no responsibility for that title. I take
no responsibility for that error.
but the podcast was a blast, and it just, I celebrate anytime Indigenous people are doing what they're passionate about. And the writers and producers and even the actors in the show, if that's your path, if that's your passion, if that's your gift from Creator, absolutely, I celebrate when you do well. We all celebrate when our relatives do well. And talking to Chad Charlie and Tommy Pico, I mean, it's clear that they're passionate about this and that they're doing what they love. But what struck me about that episode is just how they expressed that they were told by Sterling Harjo, when they expressed gratitude about being welcomed onto the show and given opportunities to write and do what they do best, that he said to them, all I ask is that you leave the door open behind you. And
yeah, they did say that.
So often, there is professional jealousy, or there's jealousy from people in your community if one person does well. There's talk, there's negative talk, and there's personal and professional jealousy that people have left the reservation and are living out there amongst them other people. But this was sort of a celebration of when people do well, how happy it is when they can help other people. Reach your hand out and help other people to succeed also, because the more voices we have out there that are not only addressing things like the lack of representation of Native stories, but how we have to tell them ourselves, how we as Native people have to be the ones telling those stories. And it doesn't work if someone else does it. And however we want to tell them, be it cinema, music, However, it's a righteous thing to do, but it has to be done by Native people. So I loved just hearing them talk about that and how proud they were that they were able to tell these stories that were Native stories, and they're not made up from Hollywood. They came right from the native hearts, native minds. And it was great to have them both. It was great to talk to them both. Now we need to talk to the women, because like they're seriously the most badass characters. I mean, come on, who doesn't love Willie Jack? But like the women in that show are badass. And I really, really hope that we have a chance to talk to some of the women in the show about how they feel about their roles on the show and what they've been able to portray. Because that to me would be something.
Yeah, it was really cool recording that episode, like kind of at the beginning of the year, and then watching the second season unfold in August and September, like 6 months later, because wasn't it like the third or the fourth episode was written by Chad Charlie, and he told us he got an entire episode. He had to write an entire episode because they were writing the episodes at that time when we did the panel and the interview with them. And then the last episode of the second season was written by Tommy Pico. And it was just really cool to be like, hey, we talked to those people. And then to kind of see what they created and then to see it brought to life in the second season. I don't know, just really kind of a joy. I don't know. Just really, it's not always like terribly political or anything like that. But there's a lot of joy, I would say, in Reservation Dogs. Just a lot of like, it's very heartfelt. Very funny, and it's very emotional. It's very wholesome. All of those things at the same time. And I definitely think the episodes that Chad Charlie and Tommy Pico wrote definitely fit the bill when it comes to that whole range, I think, of feelings and why we love the show. And it makes me think now we actually need to do another episode, because we never reviewed season 2. We never reviewed season 2 this fall. It just didn't end up like hitting the docket of podcast episodes for some reason, because we had other things we needed to talk about, or I don't know, scheduling was kind of wacky because it's been a wild few months. We're definitely going to do, so our kick-ass comrade Nikki from UCSD has pitched another possible event in the spring with women, not just writers, probably also actors from the show. And so we'll stay tuned. We'll be able to announce that sometime in the near future. Once we nail down when that's going to happen and who's going to be involved. But you know what, Elena, maybe our first episode of 2023 should be another just kind of roundtable of Red Nation comrades just giving a review of season 2 of Reservation Dogs, because we never did that.
And honestly,
even though we loved it,
season 2 really got me. Like there were times I was laughing so hard I was crying, and then there was times I was crying. Honest to God, crying. And anyone who knows me know I don't cry very much. But the season with the episode with Willie Jack in prison with her
so
auntie. Oh my God. Did I feel that?
That was oh my God. Anyway, makes me even emotional just thinking about it right now.
And I have to say, yeah, when we get into that episode on second season, I just, one of the things that I loved so much was, I think it was the second episode with Gary Farmer and Wes Studi, where they're trying to break the curse that Willie Jack has put on Jackie. And she gets cheese, and they're gathering up the hair, and they're doing all this, and they get to the ceremony, and they've got these two just like the OGs of Native actors, Wes Studi and Gary Farmer, and they just start like riffing on each other. It is some of the funniest thing. As funniest things I've ever seen.
Tom Petty.
They start singing Tom Petty, Free Falling. And it was so hysterical. And then back in October, I was at a Indigenous Peoples Day rally. We were rallying against the Kit Carson Memorial in downtown Santa Fe, Ogapoge Oinge. And we were lined up. We had banners and signs, and we were getting ready to leave where we were staging. And someone and it was all women, almost all women. Someone in the back of the line said, "Does anyone know a song we should start singing?" And I started singing Free Falling. And it was hysterical because all Indigenous women from all ages, I was probably one of the oldest, down to, teenagers. And I just started saying, "She's a good girl, crazy about Elvis." And all of a sudden, everyone starts singing and everyone knew the words and everyone was laughing. It was just like,
are you serious?
At that moment, I was like, this is the native, not only is that now the native anthem, but like that is clearly what brings people together. Everybody watches that show. And we were laughing, and it was dead serious. We were out there, marching against genocide. Glorifying genocide. And yet the moment of levity when we all started singing Free Falling was like, yeah, man, this is us. It was great.
Okay. Now that first of all, you've not told me that story. That's badass and hilarious. And I think Red Nation from this point forward should now start singing Free Fall. Instead of chanting like the standard political chants, we should just start singing Free Fall. Because all of the Indigenous people in the crowd will know exactly what that's from.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was like, there was not a single person in that line of us who didn't know and either start laughing or start singing. So yeah,
oh my god. Aw, that's so wholesome.
Yep.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing our next review, our Red Nation review of season 2. And then I'm really looking forward to whoever we get to talk to in March or April for the second year of
it better be fanciness. The aunties. I want aunties. I want aunties.
No spoiler alert. I mean, we're going to try to make this happen, but there's an auntie episode in season 2 where they all go to an IHS conference. Everyone knows what this episode is I'm talking about. We ourselves on this podcast have identified ourselves as kind of some angry aunties. And so we kind of just want to have like an auntie, I don't know, extravaganza or something with the aunties from that episode on Reservation Dogs. So if you know any of those actresses, tell them to hit us up. Because we're very interested.
We need the auntie energy. Seriously.
Aw. All right. Good times. Well, yeah, let's do that for our first episode in 2023 in a few weeks. Be on the lookout for our review of season 2 of Reservation Dogs. Okay. I just wanted to mark another podcast episode really quickly. We don't have to go into like what the content of that episode was, but it was the one that we called Native Woman Freestyle. Hour or something. Maybe it was just Native Woman Freestyle. That was April 25th. And the only reason why I wanted to bring this up was because I'm fairly certain that was the very first time we coined the phrase Native Woman Freestyle as like the vibe of Red Power Hour. If people have been listening to this podcast for a long time, like over the last 2 years of its existence, I mean, you've probably seen like a huge shift, I think, in how we talk. Or like the kinds of things we talk about on the podcast. And I'm OG. I've been with it since the very beginning. And I used to feel so structured. I felt like I had to really prepare. And I don't know, we used to have like talking points. And you know how there are like a lot of political podcasts that are very like very well produced, I guess, or like, you get what I'm saying? They're kind of like almost like scripted. They're scripted. Is kind of how it feels. And so I felt for a long time pressure to be scripted. And it wasn't really until this year that I kind of started to feel more like, oh, we can just freestyle. And sometimes we say dumb things. And then other times it's pretty fucking brilliant. But when do Native women just get to freestyle, on our own type of platform and kind of give zero fucks about it? Like, it's pretty awesome. So
it is. And I love when we're able to do that and sort of just go off, because it reminds me, I mean, I grew up I had 6 cousins, and 3 of them are women, and we do feast days a lot, and so we'd feed people and do dishes, and then the table would be clear and it would just be family, and it was almost always the women, and we would just be sitting at the kitchen table and we would just be shooting the shit, and it was exactly like this. Like, sometimes someone would say, hey, have you seen X movie? Or someone would say, something about a relative of ours. And, I mean, it could be about anything, but the one thing that always, I remember the feeling of being able to say anything and laugh, just laugh. And that's what Native Women Freestyle is. It's like, this is our kitchen table, and we've just fed a bunch of people, and we know we're going to have to do it again. So we're just taking a load off and, talking to our relatives.
And it's also like rowdy, right? Like,
yep.
It's like the Res Dogs episode of the aunties at the IHS conference. Oh, sorry, my Telegram notifications. Let me turn this off. They're just rowdy.
Yep.
And
they give zero fucks.
Rowdy. Yeah. And it's like really like demanding and kind of like assertive and, I don't know, righteous.
Yep.
I don't know. That's like, just a little rugged sometimes, but it's how we roll.
Yep.
Here on RPH. I really love it. I actually look forward to every time we get to sit down and record. Even though, truth be told, like, we are not always with it when we have to sit down and record. Sometimes we're really exhausted. We're in the middle of something else. Sometimes I have a wicked headache when we record, or I'm like spacing out, just because I'm like so overwhelmed by my life and like all of the multitasking I have to do all the time. But, we still show up and we deliver variously successful content, but that's just because we are actually just completely ourselves. Like, even in a moment where we're not all with it or together, we're a little messy. We can be a little messy. I don't know. Don't you think that's also just kind of
absolutely
freestyle?
Yep.
Just a little messy. Who cares? Yep. Everyone's a little messy.
It's true.
So yeah. Well, I have other favorites, but I'm going to let you go next because I think I've done the last 2.
Alien Men's, All Men's. Is that the next one on the chronology?
Yes. Yeah. It's on my list.
Alien Men's, All Men's. I think that was your quote. Was it?
Alien Men's, All Men's. Yes,
all
it
men's.
Was.
So, that was about the movie Prey, which we had Kylie and Justine on that episode, and we had all watched it. I think some of us watched it in Comanche and English, but we just watched it because it just came out, and like, that was an amazing episode because I think I watched it twice, and then I had like in my mind what I was thinking of, and yet, but all of us brought in different perspectives and different things, and we just started riffing on each other. Oh yeah, my God, I didn't even think about that, and it was amazing. It was a great movie. It was a great movie to talk about, just because. The female character. I mean, it was great to have a female character to talk about.
I just love it because I thought we did an excellent job. I thought we slayed that movie review for that movie, and I loved it that it was a bunch of Indigenous women reviewing a movie, because it was like, I don't know, we just trashed heteropatriarchy the whole time. And I think that's why I said alien men's, all men's like are dumb. Or I said something to that effect because I was like, the movie would have been better if Predator wasn't even in it.
How Predator was just a man. You said something.
Man.
You said something about he's just like any other man. Alien men's all men. And we all started laughing like, yeah. He was superfluous to the entire movie. He couldn't have not been there and it would have been just as good.
No, that was a really fun movie review because that movie was so anticipated and also it was just really good. I thought that movie was really good. It had like a few flaws or whatever, but yeah, I was a fan.
And that, yeah, so I think some of the pop culture episodes that we did were great. The Alien Men's All Men's was great. And then the one we all love to hate, Dark Winds, another one of my favorites, just because I think we got a comment on that, which was just really, yeah, so glad you reviewed this. Now I don't have to watch it, which was kind of the way we all felt about Dances with Wolves. We watched it so you don't have to. Dark Winds was just, oh God.
Yeah, that was also on my list of favorite episodes. The episode is titled Dark Winds, Shame on You from October 24th. Not because I liked the show, but again, I thought that we actually did like a good job with our review. We really covered all the bases. And it was such a different, like Prey and then Reservation Dogs and Dark Winds represent like a spectrum of representation. I just used representation twice. A spectrum of like how Indigenous people are making their way into media in this particular moment. And they're very, very different types, I would say, of Indigenous representation. So it's good to like talk about the different things, and some of them obviously seem more successful than others. But yeah, Dark Wind's not successful.
No, and just, a complete juxtaposition to why Native people should be telling our own stories and not elevating white people, white men, telling stories about us that are not our stories. And the fact that loved the episode because I think we did a great job taking it apart and deconstructing why it was so bad, but also like, why do we continue to Dark Winds? This is the second time it's been made, and there have been multiple attempts to make Tony Hillerman's novels into films and series, and they're all bad. And it's almost like this zombie keeps coming back to life and coming to haunt us, but none of them are good. So when are we just going to be able to put that zombie to rest and say no more Hillerman anything? And they're here because I was driving around the other day. I was going to the bank, grocery store, something like that, and I see the sets. They're filming again all around Santa Fe. So the zombie is still alive.
God. When were we talking about zombies? I think during like the Halloween episode we did, it was like the live recording. It's like, I don't know, like heteropatriarchy and settler colonialism. It's just like zombies. It's like die, zombie, die. Like, why won't you just die? And then even when they're dead, they like still resurrect in these bad shows. It's like even from the crypt. Even from the crypt, you're still being racist. Damn it. Like, yeah, Dark Winds failure. I highly, highly doubt season 2 is going to be any better than season 1. I don't particularly want to put myself through watching it. The only reason I watched the first season was for Red Power Hour, but I did like a 7-day free trial for, what was the subscription service? It was on Showtime, or you had to get it through Amazon Prime, I think. All I'm saying is, like, I ain't fucking paying to watch the second season of that show. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so they did Chris Eyre, who produced, one of the producers, has said publicly that he's taken into account all of the criticism, particularly by Diné people, of the show, and will try to do better. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he did say he would try to do better for season 2. So I will sacrifice myself and watch it, because I think wherever it is, I think I have it. I don't know what.
Oh, like for free, or like you subscribed already to that streaming service? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be any better either, but I will give it a shot.
All right. Well, now I feel like I should too. Maybe I can get a free 7-day trial and catch it again before the trial is up, and then cancel the trial subscription. Something people may not know about me, ISO, is that I am very thrifty. I am a penny pincher. Pretty much everything, including all the stuff we have to do for Red Power Hour. So moving forward, I also really liked The Scourge of Pretendianism. So that was a Patreon-only full episode. So that was behind the Patreon paywall. But the preview for that came out on November 3rd and caused quite the stir on social media. I was attacked personally by someone I know, actually. But it was a bit of a shit show. And let's be honest, anytime you talk about pretendianism, it's always just a shit show on social media. And what was really weird is that, like, the pushback we got was from people who, like, we actually know for the most part. And I'm like, maybe instead of, like, saying weird shit on Twitter, why don't you just fucking call me? You know? Like, that's actually always what's disturbing to me about how people genuflect and virtue signal on social media. They would rather post something to appear like they have a certain political line about something like pretendianism, as opposed to just like treating you like a relative and having a uncomfortable conversation with you, but nevertheless, you know, trying to find some sort of, like, I don't know, understanding so that you can move forward in a positive way. And what was interesting is I feel like some of the folks who attacked us for that preview didn't even listen to the episode, first of all. So that's a thing. Listen to the content you're critiquing before you level a critique on social media. That's a lesson. That's a lesson learned. But something else that I wanted to say at the time, but I let go just because it felt really negative, like the attention we were getting, is it okay if I say this, Elena? If I talk for a little bit in my reflection, I don't want to cut you off. You know, particularly with the ethnic fraud and the so-called pretendian episode, or not episode, but the pretendian issue, is that, like, there's a certain group of people who've really dominated the discourse about pretendianism. And because of that, no one is even allowed to talk about that issue without being automatically associated with certain of those individuals. And then somehow you're interpolated into either quote unquote supporting what that person says or how they go about the issue of, like, investigating ethnic fraud, or you're supposed to be, like, against them. And there are only two camps you're allowed to sit in. You're either for them or against them. And so then it becomes about, like, people's celebrity and their reputation and, like, personality politics. And something I wanted to say in response to, like, all of the negative feedback that we got online was that, like, I don't have to play by those rules, and neither does Elena, and neither does our podcast. We're Indigenous people. Like, I'm a professor of American Indian Studies. I came out of another Native American Studies department. Like, I work in the profession that has the largest number of ethnic frauds of any profession or industry in this country. I not only have a right, but I have an obligation to speak out about this issue. I am perfectly capable of forming my own analysis and my own perspective on this issue that isn't tied to, like, the reputation of somebody who has pissed you off, or tied to the voices that have been, like, overbearingly loud about this issue on social media. And Elaine and I are two grown women who are very intelligent and quite educated, who have every right to talk very honestly and very openly about this issue. And I just wanted other people, especially Native people who listen to this podcast, who have maybe felt scared to have a strong position on pretendianism because of how much backlash you get when you talk about this issue. I hope that our episode opened a door for other Native people to talk about this issue openly, for the discourse not to be dominated by a few voices, for it not to be like constantly riddled with these like back and forth infighting and like the personality politics that seem to really drive the discourse. No one owns the discourse on pretendianism. All Native people should be concerned about this issue. All Native people have a right to talk about this issue, to analyze it, to push back against it, to defend their communities and their people against it, because it affects all Native people. And so I'm just really hoping that that particular episode helped to, I don't know, kind of like pivot away from the way that certain individuals have like forced the rest of us, I guess, to talk about pretendianism. And that it's opened a pathway for people to have a different type of conversation about it. That's what I really hope. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to the episode, I would join our Patreon. Like, we have a ton of content for our patrons, and it's like $1 a month, and we need the money. But also, like, yeah, you get access to that content. But I don't know. I would just highly encourage you to listen to it. That's my spiel. I've been wanting to say it for like 2 months.
Yeah, that was a crazy, like, the backlash of that. And I have to true disclosure here. I never really got into a conversation about pretendianism until a relative friend of mine from Okewinge, AC Agoyo, who started Indians.com, Indians with a Z, reached out to me about a certain author. And just asking if I had heard of her, or if I knew of anybody from Okewinge who was related to her. And it started this whole sort of journey for me about how damaging these individuals can be, and particularly when they're not attached to a community, they're not a member of a community, they want to claim community for their own benefit, but they don't want to be respectful of the community, members of the community. And then I got accused of being anti-Black. And so it hasn't been that long that I have been sort of involved in this issue. But after the episode that we did on Red Power Hour, I actually was forced to read about some of these people and the things that they've done and the camps that they've established and the lives that they've damaged and the pain that they've caused. And I just, as Melanie said, this discourse doesn't belong to anyone. The academia, is rampant with pretendians, and it is a real issue when you're taking jobs and voices from actual Native people with lived experience. And it is something that should be talked about. It is something that's important, and people should be afraid to say things. But given how Melanie was attacked, given how I have been attacked, it's no surprise that people are not thrilled to talk about it, but we should feel that we are free to discuss it and free to discuss it in a respectful way. And if we're wrong about someone or something, we're going to admit it. We are not, we're not assholes. I'm sorry. But like, if I'm wrong about something, I will admit it and I will apologize for it.
And we did.
Yeah.
We were wrong about somebody and it was brought to our attention. And so we corrected it. I mean, and also we have a right to be indignant and really pissed off about this, because it's like, stop doing this. Stop lying about who you are. And it's like, what I have seen a lot with the social media-based discourse around pretendianism is it's almost like been a silencing in some ways of Native people speaking up about this and talking about how disgusting pretendianism itself is, how ethnic fraud is a very pernicious and a very destructive type of playing Indian, a very destructive manifestation and a practice of settler colonialism, that if we don't have a strong understanding of why it happens, and if we don't have a strong approach to tackling it when it happens, right? And then to repairing our communities in the aftermath of like finding out that someone we trusted is an ethnic fraud, then, you know, it's going to make it much harder, I think, for us to continue to advance the struggle for Indigenous liberation. And so we just need to be able to talk about it openly. And for the people who attack other people online, who want to speak about pretendianism openly, a lot of the ire of these people seems to be focused on like the reputation of individuals, whether it's the individuals who are under scrutiny for either lying or potentially lying about who they are, or having like a messy understanding of their background. It's like the reputation of that person, and then the process of trying to find out if they're lying, and then that process of finding out how they're lying, that is more offensive to some people than the actual act of lying in and of itself. And I think that I understand the people who, you know, are very sensitive about like the way that the investigation of ethnic fraud is carried out. Okay, sure. Like I can agree with you about how some of that doesn't sit well with me. But as a Native person, that's not as important. That is secondary. They're far secondary to the act of pretendianism itself. That is far more disturbing to me. And I would actually like to see some of the loudest people on social media who are always weighing in about the pretendian issue, who are always focusing on their like feelings about people's reputations in the way that, you know, the call outs and the accountability process happens online. I would actually like to see you have a really strong stance against pretendianism first and foremost. And I would really like to see I would like to see a pro-Indigenous perspective advanced by these same people, you know, because this is something that is very racist. It's incredibly racist, and it is a disgusting type of settler behavior. It needs to be called out. It needs to be squashed. And like, Native people deserve for our own people who are on social media to do this on our behalf, but we just deserve it because, you know, we already have so many settler fires we're always trying to put out. You know, this should be the least of our worries, is people just lying about being Indigenous, but apparently it's like a huge issue. So this is all I'm saying. Like, how did an act of profound racism against Native people become about the feelings about individuals and their reputations, or the feelings of individuals and their own identity journeys? Your feelings as an individual about those things does not trump the long 500-year struggle for Indigenous liberation. It just doesn't. And so, I don't know, maybe we'll get attacked again this year in review. Come on. I ain't standing down. Like, no. And I would encourage other people, you know, to say what you think, and to have a strong perspective, you know, about this issue. Because I'm honestly just tired of hearing the same, like, 5 people. Yep. Just like yelling at each other about this issue on social media.
Attacking
and just
each other personally.
Us. Yeah. Yeah. Stop attacking each other personally. Like, yeah. I don't take this issue personally. I really don't. Like, this is a political, a historical, and a structural issue that affects all Native people. Like, my personal feelings about it, that shit don't really matter to me. So, And I've been affected by it personally. So that's what I had to say on that episode.
And it needed to be said because that was a crazy episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was let's try to bring some levity here at the end. That was the last episode I had on my list of top episodes. Oh, I also liked Water is Our Relative.
Water is Our
October
Relative
3rd.
is a really good one. Yeah.
From October 3rd. I went on like a 30-minute monologue rant about the Colorado River.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm so sorry.
It was great because it was so timely. It was in the news, and you gave a great historical perspective and background to it. No, it was fabulous, and how you know, and being in the Southwest, the water's always on our mind, and so hearing that about the Colorado, which is in the Southwest, and then seeing in the news, about Lake Powell and just how devastating the water crisis is and how it's going to get worse. I mean, that was a powerful episode.
Heck yeah.
And we should all be I don't know. I mean, this is a weird story, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, I was on Canyon Road of all places which is the most touristy, colonized, horrible place in Santa Fe. And I was having lunch with a friend, and some piano player was there, and he started talking to us, and we were talking about people. He said something about people come into this restaurant when it's raining to get out of the rain, and he says, I really like playing for lots of people, and I said, well, here's to hoping we'll have more rainy days. And his response was, no, we don't need any more rain. And I literally stopped and looked at him and said, what? This is the Southwest. How could you say that? How could you even think it, white guy, right? How could anyone say in the Southwest, no, we've had enough rain? That's like, I mean, I don't know. It's as close to being a heretical statement as I have ever heard in my entire life. Yeah, we don't need any more moisture. We're in, we're in New Mexico.
Stupid. I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's shit's bad. The drought is bad. There's anyway, listen to that episode. It's a main feed episode. It's free. But I'm just talking about one significant watershed. Think about the watershed where you live. 10 years max. We're fucked. And that's the goddamn truth. So, and the settler developers, they're not gonna change their behavior. What do you do? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do except for indigenous people to just buckle down and just get prepared for being in really difficult situation for the long haul. I don't know. It's not the most hopeful thing. But it is very much, though, like a we told you so kind of episode. But that's how I always feel about indigenous knowledge systems and how no one listens. Well, we're at a little over an hour. It's going to be a long-ass episode for everyone. It's because our comrades Nick and Jen recorded for an hour. So yeah, it was 2 hours of content. Holy moly. Best of 2022. But yeah, it was really nice going back over this with you. I don't know. I have no idea what 2023 is going to hold. feel like we're going to be more like organized in 2023.
That'd be good. I
just in general.
Yeah. From a personal and a professional perspective, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
We were given this gift of time of having this week off between Christmas and New Year's, and I actually feel this year feels different. And first of all, OK Wingay is dancing, and it's a very important ceremony for us, because the turtle dance is our new year, and not to be able to participate has been weird, like a weird time anomaly of like not having the new year welcomed in and not having the return of the sun, blessing. And so I feel like there's sort of a return to, I don't know, I can't call it normal, but quote unquote normal. And so I'm feeling more hopeful about this winter season, time to reflect and think, and yeah, maybe get organized, like get it together, because I feel like there could be some good things coming, and I feel like there's going to be some real challenges. But
if we're like organized, then we'll be able to handle anything. That's kind of how I feel. But being organized, it's kind of like, it's just been such a remarkable period of upheaval for everyone. And I'm thinking about like where Red Media and the Red Nation are right now. And we're in a good place, but it's like we're in a place where we're really needing to get our act together, almost like internally, like how structured. We need to just be structured. Like we need to have a routine again, or we need to be in a flow, Yep. It's been so difficult to be in a flow because of the pandemic, and it's really been very hard. It's been hard. It's been a hard, like, couple of years, I would say.
Yep.
3 years?
Because you just never knew what was next. I mean, it was almost like you were afraid to open the door because you didn't know what was outside. And, there was the pandemic, which, I mean, was unbelievable. But then just politically and internationally, and everything that went on, in the global South is going on now in the global South. It was almost like you wanted to hide under a pillow because you weren't sure what was going to be there when you woke up every morning. And I kind of feel like maybe I'm not so afraid anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't feel as unpredictable, I think, as it has felt. And like monumentally unpredictable, like so unpredictable you can't plan anything kind of thing. And so I feel like 2023 is a year for planning. It's a year for restructuring and kind of getting into a groove. That's how I feel. I feel very like optimistic actually about it. So
isn't that scary?
Isn't that weird?
It is. But I mean, because it's been a long time. It's almost like I feel the same way, but I'm almost afraid to, because I think, oh yeah, I'm going to be optimistic, and then what the hell is going to come down next? But I feel
January 6th.
Well, that wouldn't be so bad. But just kidding.
Well,
that was a joke.
Cena, delete that. Wow, Elena.
I know. No, I was just thinking how much we got out of that. The guy with the flag painted on his face and the horns, the buffalo guy.
Oh, it's just so rich in content.
It was so rich in
It's just
content. Yeah, I didn't mean
generative, as they say in the academy.
I didn't mean I wanted people to die. No, that would not be. No. No, but
like
it did.
you said, we're not assholes.
No, it didn't. It gave a lot of content. Yeah, there was what was it? Settlers Gone Wild.
One of the all-time best episodes for the Red Nation podcast. Well, there will certainly be upheaval, certainly, in 2023, but I really feel like winter is a time to like settle in, to plan, to think, to be quiet, to do kind of like to toil away inside. And if we're doing that and we're learning the lessons of winter, I think, once spring and summer come, we're going to be ready. We'll be ready for whatever. Yep. So, well, shit. 2022 came and went. I did not finish my book. Someday. I moved. Whatever. 2022 was a shit show. But, yep, here's to 2023. And yeah, we'll see folks back in a few weeks. I don't know when we're going to record our first episode of 2023. I need a break.
It'll be sometime.
It'll be sometime. You heard it here. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the new year.